All right, it is the System Failure Podcast, number 44. How's it going, Nate?
Hey, Brian, number 44. Well, this is going to be a good one, I think. We're going to be departing from our usual fare because there's been major developments in American society. Yeah, Brian, I see you've got some extensive notes on this topic. So why don't you lead it off for us?
Yeah. Well, so what's just happened is, Donald Trump got shot on Saturday, but he only got shot in the ear, so, he's still alive. But I am on vacation from work this week, so I went over to the Arabica Coffee, and, I had my first cup of coffee in a couple weeks here. I got all jacked up. Yeah, and I got a couple pages of notes on the matter here.
All right. Well, all right. This is pretty good. That's some serious productivity.
All right. So yeah, just, to get into it. So the Donald, what was he in, Pennsylvania?
Yeah, outside of Pittsburgh, a couple 30 miles north, I think.
Yeah, and so some gunman from a rooftop, he's just delivering a speech, and then all of a sudden the Donald's and this bullet grazes his ear, and, he's bleeding, and then, he gets a bunch of security, jumps on top of him, and then, he gets up and, he puts his fist in the air and starts shouting, USA, USA. It's just a crazily shocking scene, right? I should imagine virtually, unlike usual when we have to explain our obscure references, I feel like everyone will have seen the video for themselves. But yeah, just in case they haven't, that's basically the long and short of it there. Well, anytime there's an assassination attempt on a former president or a president, it's just a pretty big deal. And, I guess we haven't actually been through one of these before, right?
Last time was 1981 with Reagan.
Yeah. So, that was prior to my existence. Yeah. And, we were just kind of predicting drama after the presidential debate there when Biden floundered terribly. And it only took a week for it to manifest. So, it's pretty crazy. And so... So I guess there's, it's easy to get all conspiratorial about this, but I think we have to, at least for the moment, before we get into, going deep down the rabbit hole, we just have to entertain the notion that this guy maybe is a lone wacko gunman. It is hard to fathom because this guy's on a rooftop 450 feet away. And it's just an insane lapse of security that this was allowed to happen. Although to be fair, did you see the female security details scrambling to holster her gun, and the whole security seems terribly incompetent. So I don't think it's that crazy of an idea that maybe it could not be a grand conspiracy. Well, just from the normie point of view, I don't really have one point, and that is that the Donald's been framed as this existential threat to democracy, and he's characterized as Orange Hitler. And so, but now Biden has to go out there and be we got to condemn this kind of thing. The Donald's not really an existential threat. And I guess you can't call for the Donald to be shot, but there is this whole thing where he has been painted as this insane existential threat who he's Putin, he's going to take over our country, and this is going to be the end of democracy as we know it. It kind of harkens back to the idea that just this narrative we've been sold is that Donald's some kind of sleeper cell for Russia, right? Yeah. And that he's Hitler. The Hitler thing has been bandied about a lot, and that really says it all. But yes, I agree with you. Yeah, he's Hitler, but this Hitler is just admires Putin and wants to be like Putin. This is the crazy boogeyman that's been blown up about Donald Trump. Yeah. So, if you just take the normie view here and imagine that things aren't going to continue to escalate from here, it's a terrible look for the establishment, and any chance that Biden was somehow going to pull this out. You see the crazy image of Donald Trump with his fist in the air and bleeding, and there's just no coming back for the establishment after this, right? There's
the AP photography caught the shot of the American flag billowing behind the Donald as he raised his fist defiantly in the air, and then a trickle of blood, running down from his right ear. My first thought was, this is too perfect. I didn't think it was the deep state had the Donald. I thought the Donald did it himself. I was is this state? My first thoughts were, this is way too perfect. You're telling me that there was an assassination attempt, but it only grazed the Donald, and then he get a perfect photo op in the ensuing seconds. There's just, and it's the end for Joe Biden. I understand that now the Democratic operatives are no longer seeking to replace Biden on the ticket after the events of this past weekend. which is reported by Breaking Points, which is interesting. But it's the end for Joe Biden's re-election chance. You will not. There's no way. I mean, there's a lot of time between now and the election. But as the chips are stacked on the roulette table now, that's the end of the line. The Donald looks like a boss, and Joe Biden is just coming off a humiliating stretch on the last debate. There's just no that puts the debate that puts the election in the can. Barring any further dramatic developments or assassinations or whatnot. So yeah, that was my thought too. Too perfect. Too perfect. If it was the deep state shot themselves in the foot, if you'll pardon the parlance.
Well,
but, yeah.
I think it's going to be pretty easy to determine whether this is part of some elaborate conspiracy or whether it is some kind of lone gunman, and you can just tell based on where it goes from here, right?
Yeah.
If we see continually escalating insane events, you can be sure that it is part of a grand conspiracy. Or if somehow that's it, and the establishment just lets Donald Trump, march to victory, which seems pretty improbable. So
the Donald's courting corporate donors now. He's not. He's sounding. I would say the Donald is sounding fewer of the populist notes that he sounded in the 2020 election, and in 2020 he sounded fewer of the populist notes than he did in the 2016 election. Do you think the deep state really wants to keep the Donald out of the election?
Well, okay, my other system failure prediction here is that if the Donald does get elected, he's going to make a peace deal in Ukraine, right? This nonsense is going to come to an end, and we'll no longer have to worry about nuclear war, at least as much as we do now. And so I think that's guaranteed to happen, right? And so I think it's a pretty big deal as to whether the Donald gets elected or not, right?
You think the assassination is a big factor in whether Donald gets elected, or his stance on Ukraine is a big factor in whether he gets elected?
Well, it's a big deal to the establishment as to whether he gets elected. Because
there's a swing here because the Donald, even though he'll happily continue the situation in Gaza, the Donald has run on putting the kibosh on the situation in Ukraine. You think that that's enough to stop the military-industrial complex from wanting him to be in the White House? Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. Well, I don't love the situation in Gaza, but the nuclear brinksmanship with Russia is an existential threat to all of us that we should very much be worried about, right?
I'm inclined to agree with that. You probably heard Annie Jacobson on the JRE recently. She has a new book about that. And Dan Carlin always worries about it too. And final point, if you wanted to vote for someone who was not going to support the ongoing situation in Gaza, you have a long wait, because not even voting for the likes of RFK is going to get you out of that. But anyway, carry on.
So I think also just the thing about Donald Trump is that, really he's like a hotel and casino guy, right? And this is just about the difference between Donald Trump versus, a regular establishment candidate like Joe Biden. But he's just like a casino guy, right? And I think what he wants to do is turn America into a glorified Las Vegas, which there are certainly problems with. But I think the dude's interested in making money, whereas our reptilian overlords or the establishment or whatever, what's important to them is control, right? And just the cold, brutal nature of this crazy war machine that we've got going on. And so, that's so the Ukraine kind of fits into the broader direction of which way we want to go, right? And so, I think Donald Trump ultimately is a capitalist. And so I think I guess that's the icing on the cake on why it's a big deal as to whether we have Biden versus Donald Trump. And then so just another way I want to come at this is that you just gotta remember that back the Democrats actually used to be the anti-war, anti-censorship party, right, back in the 2000s, especially under George Bush, when it was easy for the Democratic establishment to pay lip service to those ideas as the good cop bad cop routine with George Bush and these crazy misadventures in the Middle East and whatnot. But it's just crazy to think about where the Democratic Party has come to, and for some reason, people have the Trump derangement syndrome is real, and it's just you got to think about what. I guess I'm gonna get into some Trumpism here, but why? What has Donald Trump actually done to hurt you or me or anyone I care about?
Only one thing I can possibly, only one charge on the Donald's bill of indictment. That's tax cuts for the wealthy. In his first term in 2017, and I really don't have anything else I don't have anything else I could possibly point to.
Well, if you talk to someone with the old, TDS, the Trump derangement syndrome, I mean, the things they talk about are like, January 6th, which, it's just people are like allowed, or it makes sense that people would want to protest this election that was unlike any other. And then, if you want to be mad at someone, you should be mad at like friggin' Ray Epps. No one like talks about that guy, but he's the guy who seems pretty clearly to be like some kind of FBI plant, telling people we need to get into the White House, right? And he's getting booed out by the crowd.
I'm reminded here of the FBI director. Oh man, is it Christopher Wray? I can't remember who it was. They had called up to the January 6th hearings, and they were asking him directly, were there agent provocateurs, were there FBI agents in the crowd in January 6th? And he's like, I can't answer that question, sorry. Which means there was agent provocateurs in the crowd in January the 6th. Like, there's always agent provocateurs at all of these things, whether it be the protests against the free trade agreements in Seattle in the 90s or Occupy Wall Street in 2010 and 11. Carry on. I agree.
And so, maybe there is some wacko. The QAnon shaman guy does seem crazy, but on the other hand, you just like obviously something's afoot when you see like the footage of like cops taking selfies with the protesters and whatnot. And I don't know, just like if you think like that's a sign of like the degradation of like MAGA America, it's just. We just had like all kinds of. We just had the crazy George Floyd protests before that, and it's unfortunate, but I don't know. I just the idea there's like not something worth protesting here, and like I get people just don't see anything wrong. Like they just see like the orange Hitler narrative is like this guy is like worse than our crazy like warmongering establishment, and just. The nuclear brinksmanship is like such an existential threat. I just can't. People's priorities are just not like lined up here with reality, right? We're allowing the military-industrial complex to propel us into places we shouldn't be, and the consequences of that are not being properly navigated or dealt with, or even brought up, in conversation, because we have a media that is owned by the same people. Like NBC, owns like General Dynamics, which makes the F-16 fighter jet. It's like, so we have I'm agreeing, we have a major issue with the way that we interpret events like January the 6th. We only have the military industrial complex's view on these matters because that's all that the media trumpets, for sure. And so like the other thing is like Roe v. Wade you have to take as like a serious threat, and I think we've talked about this before, but of course Roe v. Wade, like if they came to Maine and tried to like overturn women's right to abortion, I would happily go out there and protest. But if people in Alabama want to kneecap themselves and take away their reproductive rights, I just don't care, man. Or, God bless you. Go for it.
When you really get down to it, these these not so enlightened districts that might want to ban abortion down in the South. How many Texas is a good example. I think there were 2 abortion clinics in the entire state by design, right? But they're trying to make abortion illegal without making abortion illegal. And so, like, if you're how much access to an abortion clinic have people? First of all, there's all the women who live in states where it's still completely legal, which is most of us. And then there's just a few states that now have crazy laws. And like, how many people are actually losing with this Roe v. Wade being overturned? It's like, how many people where the rubber meets the road? How many people are actually losing access to abortion? I think the number is vanishingly few, and And then the other bit about abortion, of course, is that this political football is a huge boon to the establishment because they can fight over this football endlessly, and it doesn't affect anyone's bank bailouts or tax cuts for the wealthy or any of the other things that donors care about. And that's why Obama ran on codifying Roe v. Wade in 2008, matriculated into the presidency with the House and the Senate, and did nothing, and just totally blew up his campaign promise, because that's just for elections. That's just to drive voter turnout. We're not going to codify Roe v. Wade into law. Then we wouldn't have the political football that we can, scorch the airwaves with every night on MSNBC. So you're making a list of ways in which the Donalds have harmed us, and I think that even the most blue-haired Portland liberal is going to have to admit that the roster's pretty skinny on that front, eh?
Yeah, well, I mean, the other thing is like these 34 felony convictions, which are just what he did is he, gave some hush money to a porn star and misclassified it. And so, I mean, it's just not. People are like, oh, well, he's a convicted felon. It's just a crazy trumped up charge. Or I mean, it is what it is, but it's surely not anything that like affects any of our well being.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a good look. It doesn't speak to the Donald sparkling character. But the way that QuickBooks accounting software works is when you have an expense you enter into the system, it will give you a drop-down list with all your expense accounts, and some clerk in Michael Cohen's office like chose the wrong drop-down, I guess, and so that check should have gone to some other expense account, but it went to the campaign expense account, and now that's a huge problem. But of course, that's always the case. There are so many laws in the books that we're all in violation of any number of them. It's the selective enforcement. That's how the apparatus of power projects itself.
Well, anyway, I mean, so I guess where I want to go next here is you just got to think about, like, so this shooter, I guess, was some, like, 20-year-old kid who was, like, bullied in high school or whatever. And, I mean, really, like, there are probably a lot of people, like a lot of snipers, who could easily make the shot from 450 feet away.
Anyone can make the shot.
Well, I mean, the dude missed by, I mean, he got the dude's ear, right? I mean, think about like how much of it, like just from 450 feet, like how much, I mean, he was really close to like, splattering Donald Trump's brains like everywhere, right? Man, this like came like really close to happening. And it is bizarre. I mean, people were like pointing out, there's like cell phone footage where people are pointing out this dude climbing on the roof with a gun, and the police just kind of didn't do anything. But I don't know like how, that is just such like a systemic failure, but I guess on the other hand, just if they give the Donald like a minimal security detail and a bunch of incompetent police, and then they just put out narratives that the Donald's Orange Hitler, I mean, maybe that's just the kind of game they want to play, rather than hire some professional hitman or whatever to bump this guy off.
They denied RFK Jr. any kind of Secret Service detail for the duration of the election, despite the fact that two of his own family members, his dad and his uncle, got blown out by assassins in the '60s. You would think they're not above they're not above messing with people's Secret Service details. That certainly seems to be a game they're willing to play.
You would think that Donald would take his own security like more seriously. I mean, that's what Bobby Kennedy's doing is taking care of it himself, and it's just completely insane. I guess as to what I was saying before, I mean, the real question is like, well, what's going to happen? But I mean, obviously, the establishment is like in a huge hole here with this catastrophic failure of Biden, and like everyone can see the truth, and so. I mean, I guess like what kinds of things like can we expect in the future? Are we gonna see like more assassination attempts? Maybe they'll like we'll get like another like race riot kind of thing going. That's always a great distraction. Or we could have like some kind of giant financial like a cybersecurity attack on our banks and whatnot.
Cybersecurity. I thought you were talking about a financial crash a la 2008 or 1929.
Maybe. I guess it doesn't seem like the economy is about to collapse, especially of its own accord. It's hard to imagine that something's not about to happen here. Well, what I am is like a skeptic of like, utopianism, right? But I guess I'm pretty shocked by the assassination. It's more drama than I would have anticipated. I guess we've argued about like whether like collapse is about to happen here. Yeah. And so... I mean, for me, it's hard not to imagine that this assassination maybe suggests that collapse is or dramatic change is going to happen. But I guess what it is I'm a skeptic of like utopianism, right?
Utopianism. Well, if you crack a history book, if you go back and read history, there is like a plot to it, right? There is like a story. It builds. It seems to be building to some kind of implied climax. Horrible things happen all the time in history. In fact, history books basically only list the horrible things that happen. But over time, there definitely seems to be some sort of theme to the way that history unfolds. And so it's always my mission to try to place current events in that continuum of history. It's like the October 7th incident in Israel is a great example, right? If you start the clock at October the 7th, 2023, it's a really hard situation to understand. But if you go back to 1967 or 1945, it suddenly becomes a lot more obvious, why all the pieces are where they are on the chessboard. And this incident, the assassination attempt on the Donald, is a sure sign that there's a lot of chaos in the system. And to my mind, it shows the increasing levels of chaos. I mean, there just wasn't this kind of chaos in 2020. Even in the darkest days of the COVID era, things are definitely getting stranger, right? It's like that old William Butler Yeats poem, Higher and Higher, the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. That's the poem that ends, what rough beast slouches toward Bethlehem to be born. And you definitely get that sense of a widening gyre, right? Like a spiral out of control. And this has been the most crazy thing that's happened yet, since the 2008. Really, in my mind, this all goes back to the Clintons formalizing, obviously, with the destruction of labor unions, with the ability to move factories overseas and take advantage of cheap labor in foreign markets. We had a collapse in the influence and power of labor unions, and labor unions used to fund the Democratic Party, and the Clintons were the ones that pioneered this whole mission of collecting their campaign contributions from corporations, just like the Republicans. So now both parties are no longer one funded by labor unions and one funded by corporations. They're now both funded by corporations, and I think that really set the stage for the repeal. It set the stage for a lot of crazy things during the Clinton era, but most notably the repeal of Glass-Steagall in the late 90s. And then we had the 2000s, which makes your second point really made me think of this, like the 2000s with Bush, right? You had Bush, the Republican, who was sending us to all kinds of foreign wars. And then you had like the anti-war left in opposition to Bush. And those were the days when I watched Bill Maher and I was like, oh, I hate George W. Bush. And my political identity was obvious what it should be, or it was easy to understand, right? But with the coming and going of Obama, and with Obama his cabinet being picked by Citibank, and him jailing Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning, and I mean maybe Obama's the one that pardoned Chelsea Manning, is that right? Whatever the case may be, the many crimes of the Obama administration, particularly the financial crimes, are notorious at this point. And it's like people want to take that version of, it was easy to understand the left versus right dichotomy in the 2000s. And now we're in another place where our Democrats, the people that are supposed to represent us, the anti-war liberal types, right? They have corporate masters. So they're not going to address housing, right? They're not going to address student loan. They're not going to do any of the things all they're going to do is just try. It's like that old, what is the name of the Harvard guy? Manufacturing Consent, Noam Chomsky, that old Noam Chomsky quote. You restrict discourse within a very narrow band, but allow very lively discourse within that narrow band. And that seems to be what's happening here. Now, this past weekend, I had some of Trace's friends from Jersey up, and we were finding out about this Donald assassination all together at the same time. And I don't want to seem high and mighty, because I've been known to raise my fist and to declare that Stephen Colbert should go to jail, or be shot because he's a traitor to the people, because he's spouting. I would be frustrated with Colbert's COVID era propaganda, and I'd be like, this man is deliberately misleading people on television, and he must have collected a big bag to do it. And the people that throw their society under the bus to collect a bag are the worst sorts of people, the enemies of the state. So that's some pretty crazy rhetoric, and in the light of the past weekend, I really regret it. But the reaction from one of these particular individuals was the sight of blood running down Donald's head got a laugh, and then there was much regret about the fact that the sniper hadn't fired their bullet true and had missed the Donald. And it just felt really, if you wear the glasses of the 2000s, right, when the Republicans are the warmongering bad guys and the Democrats are the good guys, I can easily put on the glasses and go right back to that mode and be like, yeah, we've got one bad guy and one good guy, and is Joe Biden perfect? No, but at least he's not like Donald, the orange Hitler. And if I go back to that mindset, I can see why people think that way. There's a good guy and a bad guy, and we're glad that something bad happened to the bad guy, and we're hoping that something good happens to the good guy. I get that. But really what's happening is our good guys, our supposed good guys, the people that are supposed to represent the lefties, the blue people, the former Democrats, we have to be able to look at what's happening with Joe Biden and what's happening with, the suppression of Bernie Sanders and the elevation of Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden in his stead. We have to be able to look at that and realize that we've been betrayed. and that what they're doing is they're trying to appeal to the cartoonish dichotomy of the 2000s to get us to keep voting for blue or red. I think some donors are really concerned that we vote Democrat. I think other ones just want to make sure no one votes third party. But whatever the case may be, you have to be able to take those glasses off and realize that we've been betrayed by the people who are supposed to be representing us, and that they have blown up this crazy boogeyman of the Donald, and that the political assassination, there's no way it's not downstream of that, right? If you tell people that Hitler is afoot, right? I mean, we all would wish that someone would have assassinated Hitler in the early goings of his rise to power, right? You don't have to be insane at all if you believe the news media, right? That's the key. If you believe what the media is telling you, then you have to believe that we are months away from the end of the American democracy, right? Because that's what the media tells us, because the media and the Democratic Party have the same paymasters. And so, I mean, if you haven't woken up to the fact that the media will lie to you and that the Democrats are feckless, then you would be left in a black and white situation that was appropriate for the 2000s, but is no longer appropriate now that the situation has unwound. So I think it's up to us, the lefties, to not believe that the Donald is Orange Hitler, not believe the demonizations, we have to disregard the mainstream media and make our own decisions, just like you were talking about earlier when you were like, list me the actual transgressions the Donalds commit here. I mean, I only can think of tax cuts for the well. Like, I don't agree with it. Like, the Donald is like a skeezy businessman. I don't agree with any of his policy prescriptions. There's virtually nothing I agree with the Donald on, except for that he's been done dirty by the media. And as long as people remain under that spell and can't see that the media is completely feckless and totally untrustworthy, then, I mean, we're going to be in trouble. So that's what has to happen. There has to be a loss of narrative on the party of authorities to match the printing press, what it did to medieval society, or to match the bound book, what it did to Roman society. There has to be some kind of a awakening, I guess, amongst the left. Like, you know what the right wing people are going to be like. Jesus himself obviously personally saved the Donald, right? Clearly, this is divine intervention. You know what the Republican boilerplate people are how they're gonna be feeling. And we have to not be on the other side of that. It's like we knew what the pro-Bush people would think, and but back then the Democratic apparatus didn't make Bush out to be the devil or the second coming of Hitler. They didn't have to go to that extreme because they hadn't yet betrayed the American, because like the Democrats hadn't been revealed, right? The number of the magnitude of the crime perpetrated by the Democrats, or their total. They're the fact that they're completely ignoring the things that their base actually needs, like regular working people. They've ignored that for so long now that they have to blow up a boogeyman that's proportionally big to take attention away from what they've done and hopefully just try to get votes by default. And that strategy worked in 2020, and it was devastating. I just couldn't. It was so liberating when it didn't work in 2016 and Hillary Clinton had to do the walk of shame. And I was crestfallen when it did work in 2020, because like we rewarded the establishment for that strategy in 2020. And so of course they're trying it again. And this is the end game of that, blowing up a boogeyman big enough to hide your crimes. Well, if anyone who believes that boogeyman is real is going to do the only logical thing and climb up on the roof of a shed and take a pot shot at the Donald, right? So yeah, that's how I felt about the whole thing.
Well, the sleight of hand trick, right, is to get people to forget that, the Democrats are no longer the anti-war, anti-censorship party, and they obviously do that by cramming fear-mongering of the Donald down all our throats, and so what you've got is, like, I think that, people are, like, mostly good and rational, but just, in the face of all this fear-mongering, like, anyone would lose their minds.
Well, you don't not even lose your mind. If you think Hitler's coming, then a normal or a good and rational person is going to shoot Hitler, right? That it's not, you don't even have to be deranged or unhinged. You just have to believe what your authorities are telling you.
Well, I feel like you got to be somewhat deranged and unhinged to notice that the Democratic Party has completely abandoned its principles. But I mean, it is crazy. Like, the last Democrat before Bill Clinton was Jimmy Carter, right? And then we had like Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush, and then Clinton spells the end of the Democratic Party as we know it, and then it sets the stage for George Bush. to be the bad cop, and then they switch the bad cop. And well, it's just the whole like the Tower of Babel story. It's apocryphal for a reason, right? Is apocryphal the right word? The Tower.
It's a metaphor. It didn't really happen necessarily. But apocryphal is like
it's prophetic. That's what I'm trying to
prophetic. Say. Okay, I see. Yeah.
Because that's like the way it goes. Like this obfuscation of the facts is how the elite stay in power, right?
Well, it is when the elites aren't willing to share any of their wealth with the rest of the people. You have to rely on Fugazi to create the illusion that the people are included in society. And really, the vast majority of Americans have no representation on Capitol Hill, or very little. And that's what the Democrats are trying to hide with this big boogeyman they've blown up. Like, we know the Dems do not believe that the Donald's the next coming of Hitler, or they wouldn't run the senile Joe Biden. They'd get some candidate that had some wherewithal if they really believe this was some existential threat. So we just know on the face of it, like you're saying, people should have noticed that the Democrats don't intend to help working class or middle class people at all. They're just going to let the middle class be completely destroyed and let all that wealth flow to the corporations that own the party. It's really, man. I just feel like the Dems went too far trying to cover their own tracks this time, and that there's no way this is going to end well for them. I do think this will definitely win the election for Donald Trump.
Well, I think you'd have to say that it's a huge win for the people that this guy managed to miss. And the kind of world we'd be living in if the Donald actually got shot, and they're not going to get another chance like that, right? I mean, the Donald's got to smarten up that at least such a basic assassination ploy won't work. They're going to have to do something much more dramatic to finish off this beast if that's what they want to do.
Yeah. Well, I did have a chance to watch a little of the mainstream media in the leading up to this, and no one's talking about the senile Joe Biden anymore, but it was interesting to watch guys like Brian Stelter, formerly of CNN, making the rounds, and the questions are you did not. He only has two chess squares left, right? It's like his king is almost checkmated and can only go back and forth between two squares. One is, yes, I do apologize about that. I fed you complete lies and gave you a total snow job on the competency of Joe Biden because I get paid by the corporate my masters at NBC or whatever. So I accepted a bag to confuse you. That's what's really going on. But he's got one other square left, and and he's just going round and round in a circle on that little square. And that's that. Oh man, I was fooled too. It was just too hard for me, a reporter by trade, my whole life, to figure out that Joe Biden was too old for office. He really threw me off with that State of the Union. So I just got it wrong. It was an honest mistake. It is comically bad. The guy, when he was on Breaking Point, seemed really... he was getting grilled by Ryan and Emily, the blonde Kuntazi there. Yeah. And he was just writhing. They would ask... They were just... Ryan and Emily were not nice to him. They had all kinds of things he'd gotten wrong, like the Hunter Biden laptop story or COVID stuff, things that he just blatant lies he'd thrown out on CNN. And he had to respond to them all and be like, oh yeah, God, I was just so confused. It was bad. It was just it's like one of those Maoist struggle sessions. And so, I think that the media is going to have to. I wonder what your prediction is, Brian. I think that the Dems and the media are going to have to get new marching orders from their masters, because I think that this has gotten out of hand now at this point, and it's gotten so bad that it's no longer helping them. Blowing up a huge boogeyman that's not really there is no longer helping them; it's hurting them. So I think we're going to see a pivot away from that strategy and less emphasis on how the Donald's an existential threat. But I don't know where they would go, because they got nothing in Joe Biden. But I wonder what you think they're going to do about all this.
Well, I think the only pivot is to raise the stakes, right?
Wow. Oh man.
What else can they do, right? And so it's going to mean riots or some kind of terrorist attack or something horrifying.
I wonder. Oh man. Well, I don't know. I feel like if the media does ratchet things up, or they just double down on how the Donald's orange Hitler, who's going to believe them at this point? They're already flirting heavily with no one believing them anymore after the Joe Biden thing. We just talked about Brian Stelter having to just to try to make it seem like he'd made an honest mistake and wasn't deliberately misleading the rest of us. Who's going to believe they're not deliberately misleading us after an incident like this? In other words, they now have these like pictures of Trump exhibiting bravery under fire and with the flag behind him and the like just that one image alone is going to win the Donald the election. So yeah, I don't know. I got to think that doubling down on the Orange Hitler thing will either completely destroy their credibility or work against them in the way that this incident is working against the Democratic establishment. But to your point, Brian, I don't know what they're going to do. They can't come out and apologize for the Orange Hitler thing, right? They can't be like, yeah, we were feeding you a snow job. We do apologize about that. They can't do that, right? They have to double down.
I mean, my prediction is something very brazen and unsettling. Now, the COVID was pretty brazen and unsettling.
Yeah.
So maybe something, and still a lot of people fell in line. Although the COVID was like a really confusing thing at first. So what they need is like something confusing, right, and befuddling to obscure the truth with. I mean, it can't just be like a more brazen assassination attempt, or maybe it will.
I don't know. It certainly seems like there's going to have to be a lot. It's not like there's a week to the election. There is months to the election. So yeah, there's going to be a lot more wild chapters. I'm sure that you're right about that. Man, I don't know. It'll be really curious to see where the... would you say, Brian, that like COVID knocked a bunch of people off of the bandwagon to the... what I'm saying is a lot of people who believed the media pre-COVID now do not trust the media. I think that science, certainly that's happened to science, and I think it happened to the media too. Is that your assessment as well?
Well, there's just this whole thing where, Eric Weinstein talks about like what it means to be canceled, and it means that, you aren't part of like the mainstream discussion. Yeah. And so I think that like most people, certainly a lot of people, like already don't trust the media and don't trust the government, but they are successful in like marginalizing those people. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. It does seem like more and more figures are being ejected and spun off of the media, the mainstream media ecosystem. Tucker Carlson's got to be Exhibit 1A. So many people are going off to make their own podcasts. And Chris Cuomo is even making his own podcast now. There's so many people previously revered figures from the mainstream media, the corporate media, I think is a better word. I think was it Michael Malice, who said that we shouldn't call them the mainstream media, the corporate media. Their ratings are nothing compared to like the Joe Rogan Experience or Breaking Points or any of these. Or Tucker Carlson's numbers are way better than they were when he was stuck on Fox News. I think a lot of people are turning off their NPR and their CNN and their MSNBC and going, yeah, no more. We don't need any more. We'll go to some alternative media source and we'll have the more the media serves their corporate masters, the more people throw up their hands like Seinfeld in the movie theater in disgust and begin, no, enough for me, I'm out.
Well, I think it's just part of why, the point we were making last time about like Eric Weinstein and Robert Maxwell is just so important, because I think that's kind of like the final thing that people just still don't understand is that the establishment narrative is it's just nonsense, and it's not just about like the COVID or the military industrial complex. It's like the whole thing is all part of this industrial complex, right? And like that's what people have like got to understand. And the good news is that like like Joe Rogan and Elon Musk and Tucker are like very profitable like enterprises, right? And so you don't have to be part of the mainstream to make money. And I think obviously those forces are putting huge pressure on the establishment, and so we're seeing the bizarre turn of events that are unfolding in front of us.
Yep. I would say that another way and just talk about the corporate slider. But there's a trade-off between corporate profits and public good. And the problem is that we live in a fractional reserve banking system, and that means the it's not enough that the slider be hard over against the corporate profit side. They need that slider to be moving in their direction at all times, right? It's a derivative and an integral, right? It's like they need a certain percentage growth every year in their corporate profits, and so the slider has to move. And it's just they just already have all the money. There's just not a lot more money for them to get out there. We went into debt since the 80s to keep giving these corporations money, essentially borrowing their own money back from them at interest so we can continue to buy their products. But now every single category of debt is at record levels. And so that's why this is all comes down to economics. Or that I always say that, but I definitely think economics in that corporate slider when I think about the media and the Democrats and what happened this past weekend in Pennsylvania. Oh yeah, wild stuff, Brian. I am sure your characterization of a crazy 4 months to come is definitely going to come true. It's going to be something else.
I don't think we'll be wanting for content.
Yeah.
Like nothing shocking can happen between now and the next podcast, right?
I'm sure of it. Yeah, I mean everything that I would have talked about on today's pod all went out the window because an assassination attempt on a presidential. We are really getting to 60s level of turbulence and turmoil now. Vietnam War, civil rights sort of things. So, yeah, man. With the temperature is definitely the pot's definitely boiling, and we are in for one hell of a finale to this election season.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
this is usually the moment when I invite our listeners to type up an email and send it to us at nop@substack.com. Alternatively, you can check out the weekly articles to be found on nop.substack.com. They're always pretty interesting, and you'll definitely recognize some of the topics from the System Failure podcast in the past. So log on, read an essay, and send us a note and let us know what you think about our various shocking opinions.
all right. We'll see you, folks.
Take care.